Why did tiny Qatar host one of the biggest events ever, the World Cup? Honestly, it's because they're rich as f***. Yeah, that's pretty much it. They're rich as hell, being top 10 in income by almost every list out there. So how did this tiny little country get so filthy rich? I mean, look at this map. Qatar is a little nub. Zoom in and it's desert and sand and sand and sand and oh, there's a tree. Qatar is tiny. I'm talking only 80 kilometers across. Qatar is hot. I'm talking up to 50-degree days in summertime. And Qatar is barren. I'm talking only around 1% arable land. You know, cause of the sand. So this country, or region, since it has only recently become its own country in 1971, did a whole lot of nothing, and the people there did a whole lot of sitting around. Actually, they went out to find fish and pearls, but that can only support a tiny population. And then it changed. You know why it changed? I think you do. It was oil. Qatar dug and found it in the 40s, baby. But what's even better than oil? LNG, liquid natural gas. Thank God for LNG because they sit in the middle of the Persian Gulf, one of the most drama-filled, backstabbing, who will bomb who regions on Earth, with a tiny blood-stained corridor separating it from the rest of the ocean, which just so happens to control 1/2 of all crude oil exports, probably the most important resource traded right now. But Qatar doesn't care about all that because their main export isn't oil, it's petroleum gas, being the second largest exporter on Earth, having 10% of the world's reserves in their tiny EEZ, and their gas is relatively homogeneous, aka it's smooth, aka it's cheap to extract, giving them a competitive edge over those Aussies. So tons of gas, this gas, not that gas, and tons of sand, meaning not a lot of Qataris, leads to tons of exports. Qatar got rich off of petroleum exports, almost all of them going to East and South Asia. Here's their GDP per capita. 1996 was the year they made their first shipment of LNG to Japan and really started getting into gas instead of oil. And then boom! Here's the graph after 1996. The rest of what they need, they can import it. Food, water, military, slaves, everything, and I mean everything is imported, except for some fertilizers and petrochemicals made here with their natural gas. I mean, come on. Qatar is also naturally shaped like a port, catching all the stray ships in the Gulf. They were made to ship their things off by water. What else will they do? Trek their gas on a camel through Saudi Arabia, which just so happens to be emptier than your DMs? Yeah, they'll ship it by water, but that puts them at the mercy of regional politics, which is explosive to say the least. Their relationship with Iran is okay, with the US is pretty good, and with Saudi Arabia and the UAE is non-existent. They do have an open foreign door policy to maintain relationships to everybody in the region, ironically to minimize their dependence on the outside, but it also includes working with terrorist organizations like the Taliban, not the best for PR. But hey, LNG is a blessing. They don't really need to worry about regional oil politics until there are 100 missiles flying at their tiny nation. And you need to remember that. Qatar is tiny, 10 times smaller than the Saudis, almost 30 times smaller than Iran by population, and 4,000 times smaller than your mom by size. Qatar has about 3 million people, which wouldn't even give it the diamond play button if everyone there was subscribed to the Qatar channel on YouTube. But in 2005, they had only 500,000 people. How did they sextuple in less than 2 decades? It wasn't the first part of that word. Zoom in. Go further. Zoom in more. Almost there? Yes. Stop. That is Pratham Vikramaditya Advait Patel Khan. And he's here in the Qatar heat grinding away building a few stadiums. But his name doesn't sound very Arab. And he doesn't look very Arab either. Take a peek at the Qatari population pyramid. Whoa! That's a ton of men. It looks like it's gonna topple over. Why does Qatar have the most males compared to its size on Earth? Like I said before, they import everything. Labor definitely included. Why would the rich Qataris do the work hustling away at putting together massive stadiums in flashy cities? Just get cheap migrants to do it for you. Hey, petro money isn't any good if you're not gonna blow it in ridiculous ways. Especially when there's only around 350,000 Qataris on Earth. Which... wait. That means they only make up about 12% of Qatar's population. And wait. By ethnicity, they are 4th in their own country behind Indians, Bangladeshis, and Nepalis. This means Qatar has the highest immigrant population on earth at over 88%, and 95% of the people who work in Qatar are immigrants, with conditions a little, slave-like, one could argue. Nobody brings their families, they're only in Qatar to work, there are extremely tough conditions, 12-hour days and 50-degree weather isn't uncommon, and neither is death on the work site. There's so much employee abuse it would make Amazon jealous. They were originally not allowed to even leave the country through what is called kafala, although they say they got rid of it. Not really. And the average migrant worker makes about 30 times less than per capita income and around 350 times less than the average Qatari citizen does. Which means that total Qatari citizen income is 50 times larger than migrant income, with there being 7 migrants for every citizen. Wealth is way harder to measure too, and also definitely way worse, since most of the population is made up of new immigrants fresh off the boat from within the last decade type, not the super yacht oil money sheikh type. In fact, to live in Qatar permanently, you have to spend around $200,000 to even get in. Talk about bringing Country Club to the next level. If you tuned out after hearing all of those numbers, all you have to know is Qatar is unequal as Jahannam. A small Qatari citizen class owns pretty much everything in the country, with the bulk of the actual work done by impoverished migrant workers. So why is this tiny group of 1/3 people spending so much of their time and energy building the World Cup from scratch? Like I said at the beginning of the video, it's because they're richer than Richard Rich in the movie Richie Rich. And because they're wealthy and they control a huge portion of the world's natural gas supply while sitting in the most trade-frenzy region on earth, this small group has a crazy amount of leverage on the world stage. Qatar does not like their power hard. It gets too sticky like that. In any real war, they would lose in about a week. But they do love their soft power though. You know, culture and economics, those are the types of battles they fight. But if you replace the word Qatar in this video with any of these other Gulf states, you would still get a mostly correct video, which is a problem for Qatar. They need to stand out to their customers, they need a larger industry to dominate the gas market, they need regional control over the tight waterway, and when they're tired, they need a shisha break. And only one of these countries has been able to diversify away from unstable oil while also making the West love them. Hint, it's the UAE. The UAE has a secret weapon the other Gulf states don't have, called Dubai. They were able to turn a tiny oil-dependent city into a rich financial and logistics center through their amazing PR campaigns, making the tourists forget the city was ever built by slaves. Qatar desperately wants their own Dubai. They looked at that city and said, damn, I wish I had that kind of soft power. So they went out and bought that kind of soft power. Out of all the Gulf countries, Qatar is the only one to have a net outflow of investment. Not because no one wants to invest in them, although absolute monarchies aren't usually the best for competitiveness, but it's also because they're going out and buying foreign assets, whether it be European sports leagues or American shale companies. Al Jazeera, the state-owned news company, has more total subs on YouTube than Marcus Brownlee. Oh yeah, and also 1.5 billion individual users, rivaling BBC as the source for international news. Qatar Airways, the state-owned airline, is in the top 10 most traveled on airlines globally, despite Qatar being a cute little puny nation. And then there's all the new extravagant buildings and neighborhoods they're making. Barwa City, Education City, Mashairab, Doha Tower, the Mall of Qatar, Banana Island, the Qatar Towers, the National Museum of Qatar, the Pearl, blah blah blah, and more. They did this to 5x their tourism numbers in 10 years, getting their name out there to the world. And hey, Qatar is a zero tax paying absolute monarchy, so there's no one to complain about any tax dollars being wasted on shiny towers you can't even see the top of. But now that they've started, there's no stopping. What would they do with their slaggering population if they stopped building arenas and crazy looking towers? Either they're gonna get a little rioty once they all become unemployed and conditions fall even further for them, or Qatar is gonna get hit by a pretty big shock if half of their workforce leaves the country. So they just have to keep throwing petro money and build even more craziness, which all leads to the World Cup. Of course, the next step is to buy the most watched biennial event on the planet. It's an opportunity to show the world that for the last decade or two, they've been making their own Dubai. And this is no normal World Cup. It's the most expensive, ever by a long shot, 11 times as much as Brazil's Copa do Mundo. They want to show the world how much soft power they have, even if it was made by a huge migrant population, because the alternative is solely relying on exporting natural gas to Asia and praying that that never crashes. They have to keep swimming or they'll sink. So that's why they're hosting the World Cup, because they're rich as and want to stay that way.